Inside the hearing room, thick with pressure, every camera locked onto the witness table. On one side sat Mark Levin, the picture of arrogant confidence, a man who had dominated the airwaves for years under the title of constitutional giant. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, calm and steady like a trial lawyer walking into a life-or-death case. As she began pressing into his weakest points, Levin stumbled, reaching for his past as a flimsy shield. The air tightened, every keystroke and glance signaling an unavoidable collapse. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment his facade of authority would be torn apart on live television. This was not just another congressional hearing. This was the moment America watched the downfall of a symbol built on illusion and arrogance. The Capitol felt different that morning. Security had thrown up 2 extra checkpoints, and the streets outside were jammed with protesters. On one side, homemade signs read, "Practice the law," their chants echoing with every beat of the drums. On the other side, voices roared back, "Defend the Great One," waving flags with Mark Levin's name scribbled across them like a badge of honor. The noise clashed in the air, the kind of raw division that made reporters whisper this might be more than a routine hearing. Everyone sensed it. Today wasn't business as usual. Inside, the tension was no lighter. Staffers leaned against walls, phones in hand, trading whispers that weren't meant for the record. One Republican aide, overconfident, muttered to a colleague, "Just let him talk as long as he wants. The more he says, the better he looks." They believed Levin was untouchable, a man whose booming radio voice and command of the Constitution would bulldoze any challenger. That smugness was the first crack in the armor, and the press knew it. A reporter caught wind of the comment, already typing it out for a leak that would spread before lunch. In the control booth, a television producer couldn't help but smirk. She leaned toward her assistant and said under her breath, "Get ready to drop a lower third graphic that reads, Law 101. Trust me, we'll need it." The cameras were already live, panning across a packed chamber where every seat was taken, and every eye was waiting for the clash. The room buzzed, but it wasn't small talk. It was anticipation, the nervous energy that hits before something explodes. Nobody knew the exact moment, but everyone felt it coming. That was the atmosphere before a single question had been asked. Crockett sat calm and steady, her notes closed, her gaze locked on Levin. He, meanwhile, looked confident, even cocky, relishing the build-up like it was his stage. Outside, chants rattled the windows. Inside, you could feel the weight of history pressing down on the hearing room walls. This wasn't going to be just another day on C-SPAN. This was a powder keg waiting for its spark. The room tightened the moment Crockett leaned toward her mic. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge that made people stop shifting in their seats. "Mr. Levin, let's keep this simple. When was the last time you argued a case in court? I don't mean commentary. I don't mean a panel discussion. I mean standing in front of a judge, filing briefs, fighting for a client." The question hung in the air like a hook waiting to catch. Levin's smile flickered, and instead of answering straight, he drifted into his usual safe ground, talking about his time in the Reagan administration, about shaping policy, about the glory days when his opinions carried weight in Washington. He didn't answer her question, and everyone in that chamber knew it. The cameras cut to the gallery, and one caught a young law student scribbling furiously in a notebook. 3 words were underlined twice: Strickland/Chevron/incorporation. They weren't doodles. They were reminders of the basics, cases and doctrines every practicing attorney should know cold. It was a silent warning of what was coming next, and viewers at home who spotted it on the live stream felt their stomachs drop. On the Republican side, the mood shifted. Lawmakers who had been relaxed and smiling just minutes earlier were suddenly restless. A few leaned forward, whispering to staffers. One congressman typed a message and slid his phone across the desk. "Don't let him get dragged into procedure. That's where he's weakest." It was too late. Crockett had set her trap, and Levin had already stepped into the snare without realizing it. The air felt heavy, as if the whole room knew the first crack in his armor had just appeared. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With slow, deliberate hands, she pulled out a thick folder and spread a sheet across the desk so the cameras could catch it. It was a grid, neatly organized by date, time, and direct quote. Every moment Mark Levin had misstated or twisted the law on his radio show. The print was so precise it looked less like a stack of notes and more like evidence prepared for trial. Reporters in the back leaned forward, realizing she wasn't just going to challenge him. She was going to prosecute him in real time. Then she paused and tapped her tablet. Suddenly, a short audio clip played through the room's speakers. It was unmistakably Levin's voice, caught in a behind-the-scenes recording. TV doesn't check footnotes. Nobody cares about the details. The words echoed through the hearing room like a confession, and the audience gasped. Even a few Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at Levin as if silently asking, "Did you really say that?" Levin's jaw tightened, his face turning red as whispers rippled across the chamber. He knew this wasn't just a debate anymore. This was evidence. At the council's table, one of the minority party's legal advisors leaned closer to Crockett, their voice barely above a whisper. "Proceed." It was a quiet green light, an acknowledgement that she had him on the ropes and the committee would back her play. Crockett nodded almost imperceptibly, then looked straight at Levin. For the first time that morning, the Great One looked less like a master of the Constitution and more like a man cornered, his radio bravado slipping under the weight of hard receipts. Crockett leaned forward, her tone crisp, the kind that didn't leave room for hesitation. "Mr. Levin, let's test the knowledge you claim to have. What's the difference between a motion in limine and a motion for summary judgment? Give us the core distinction." The question landed fast, and before he could fully process it, she followed up. "What is the Strickland standard for ineffective assistance of counsel?" And without giving him a chance to retreat, she pressed harder. "Finally, under Chevron, what level of deference is given to an agency's interpretation of a statute? Or would you prefer to explain how the major questions doctrine alters that?" It was rapid fire, each one a shot to the foundation of his so-called expertise. Levin froze. His lips parted, but the words weren't there. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and finally stammered, "Congresswoman, these are complicated matters, and I'd like to read the precise language before—" Crockett cut him off sharply, her voice slicing through the air. "No, this isn't talk radio. This is sworn testimony. You claim to know the Constitution better than anyone else in this room. So answer." Under oath, the silence was brutal. Cameras zoomed in on his face, sweat just beginning to form on his forehead. The committee chair, sensing the moment slipping into chaos, slammed the gavel. "Order! Order in the chamber!" But the tension was already boiling over. From the corner of the room, the sergeant-at-arms began moving forward, his presence a reminder that the rules here carried real consequences. The entire chamber felt the weight of it, like a tightrope ready to snap. Levin's bravado had cracked, and the room could feel it. What was supposed to be his stage was turning into a courtroom he couldn't control. The silence after Crockett's last question was cut short by a voice from the gallery. It wasn't a protester or a reporter. It was a man in a gray suit seated quietly behind the staff rows. He raised his hand and asked permission to speak. The chair hesitated, but the man introduced himself as a former colleague of Levin's from his short time in private practice. The room shifted uncomfortably as the chair gave him a few seconds. He stood, cleared his throat, and said bluntly, "For the record, Mark Levin has never argued a suppression hearing in his career." Not once, the words hit like a hammer. Levin spun around, his face flushed with anger, but the damage was already done. The gallery murmured, cameras swung, and Crockett's expression didn't change. She had just gained an unexpected ally. Before the noise died down, Crockett slipped another document onto the record, a letter from the State Bar Association, dated years back. It wasn't public knowledge until that moment. The letter warned Levin about professional competence concerns and recommended remedial courses to maintain good standing. Though he never lost his license, the warning was real, and now it was official evidence before Congress. Reporters scrambled to snap photos of the document, their phones buzzing as editors demanded instant updates. Levin tried to object, calling it irrelevant, but the chair ruled it admissible. The letter stayed in. One Republican member, clearly rattled, raised his microphone and demanded a recess. His voice was sharp, almost pleading. "Mr. Chairman, This hearing has gone far beyond its scope. The committee erupted in cross-talk, members from both sides arguing over whether to pause. The chair called for a quick vote, the tension boiling over as the tally was read. The motion to recess failed. The hearing would go on. The crowd broke into a wave of chatter, reporters shouting questions, aides pacing frantically. The noise filled the chamber like a storm, and everyone knew the fight was only about to get uglier. Crockett didn't waste a second. She motioned to her aide, and suddenly a side screen lit up in the hearing room. On it were 3 giant slides, each with bold text and citations. Marbury versus Madison, not about judicial restraint, but judicial review. The Equal Protection Clause, explicitly tied to voting rights in the Congressional Record of 1866, and the Incorporation Doctrine, applying the Bill of Rights to the states through the 14th Amendment. It was surgical, a 3-piece strike aimed at the very foundation of Levin's public persona. The audience reacted instantly. Reporters' keyboards clattered like machine guns, and the Democrats on the panel exchanged knowing looks. But Crockett wasn't done. She had synced the display with a live Twitter feed. In real time, law professors across the country were posting their reactions, and the feed was projected directly onto the screen. "Marbury not equal restraint," one post read, with a giant red "factually false" stamped over Levin's quote. Another post lit up seconds later. 14th Amendment and voting rights. Basic history. How does a supposed expert miss this? A third professor chimed in, "Incorporation is con law 101. 3 errors, 3 red marks, all visible for the cameras and the nation." It wasn't just Crockett correcting him. It was the academic world piling on in front of his face. Levin's composure cracked. He leaned toward the mic, his voice rising with frustration. "This is a setup. These are gotcha questions, ambush tactics designed to—" Before he could finish, Crockett cut him off with the kind of sharp retort that can end a career. She leaned back, let the silence build for a beat, then said clearly, "No, Mr. Levin, this isn't a gotcha. This is week 2 of constitutional law." The chamber erupted. Laughter, gasps, even a few claps before the chair slammed the gavel. For the first time in his career, the man known for ridiculing others' legal knowledge was being schooled on the basics. "Live on national television," Levin snapped. His voice, once smooth and practiced, now came out jagged and loud as he cut off Crockett mid-sentence. "This is outrageous. I will not sit here and be interrogated like a criminal." His tone climbed higher with each word, the kind of bluster that usually worked on radio callers but now bounced harshly off the chamber walls. Committee counsel leaned over toward the chair's mic and reminded him firmly, "Mr. Levin is under oath. Any false statements or evasions may constitute perjury." The warning wasn't for Crockett, it was for the record, and everyone in the room knew what that meant. The chair raised his gavel, his expression stone cold. "Mr. Levin," he said slowly, the weight of authority in every syllable, "if you continue to evade direct questions, this committee will have no choice but to consider contempt proceedings." The room froze. Reporters stopped typing. Even the protesters outside seemed to quiet for a moment as the words sank in. Contempt of Congress wasn't just a soundbite. It meant fines, even jail time. Levin's face drained of color, the swagger slipping away as he glanced nervously at his own legal team. He leaned back into the mic, his voice breaking for the first time all morning. I need my notes. I need the precise language. These are complex doctrines." Crockett didn't miss her chance. She leaned in, her tone razor sharp but calm, the way a trial lawyer pounces on a faltering witness. "No, Mr. Levin. You've told America for years you know this material like the back of your hand. So show us, right now." Without your notes, the chamber went silent again, every eye fixed on him. For a man who had built his career on confidence, the hesitation was louder than any speech he had ever given. Crockett gave a nod to her aide, and another document appeared on the side screen. This one wasn't a media clip or a bar letter. It was a scanned letter from a professor at Temple Law, Levin's own alma mater. The professor, long retired, had responded to a congressional inquiry confirming that Levin had never completed the advanced constitutional law seminar he often boasted about on air. He attended a few sessions, the letter read, but he did not fulfill the requirements or receive credit for the course. Gas broke out in the chamber. Levin had built part of his mystique on that seminar, implying for years that it was a cornerstone of his expertise. Now on record, it was revealed to be smoke and mirrors. Before Levin could object, the screen flickered again, this time showing a Reagan-era memo, recently obtained through FOIA. It outlined his duties in the administration. Far from being a litigator or constitutional strategist, the memo listed his role as policy liaison and administrative coordinator. No trial work, no courtroom appearances, not even direct involvement in constitutional drafting. The memo was damning in its simplicity. Levin had exaggerated his role for decades. The audience murmured, and even a few Republican staffers lowered their heads, unable to spin what was in plain sight. The camera operators, sensing blood in the water, zoomed in on Levin's staff sitting directly behind him. One aide slowly slid off his headset, rubbing his face with both hands, his eyes vacant. Another stared blankly at the table, avoiding the cameras. It wasn't just Levin unraveling anymore. It was his entire team, visibly realizing in real time that the empire they had helped prop up was collapsing under the weight of hard evidence. The once carefully choreographed image of the Great One was now being dismantled piece by piece, his own past turned into exhibits against him. Crockett leaned into the mic, her voice calm but cutting. "Mr. Levin, one last chance. Define selective incorporation and give me 3 landmark cases, minimum. Every first-year law student can do this." The room went silent. Levin opened his mouth, then hesitated. "Selective incorporation, it's about the Bill of Rights, applied sometimes to the states." His words trailed off, his tone shaky, the confidence gone. For a man who had spent decades lecturing America on the Constitution, it was the sound of a balloon deflating in front of millions. Crockett didn't give him space to recover. She spoke quickly, as if delivering a closing argument. "Selective incorporation is the doctrine that applies specific rights in the Bill of Rights to the states through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Gitlow v. New York for free speech, Mapp versus Ohio for search and seizure, McDonald versus Chicago for the Second Amendment." Week 2, Constitutional Law. Her delivery was sharp, efficient, and impossible to dispute. She dropped her pen back onto her papers like a gavel. The chamber froze. No one spoke. Even the Republicans on the panel couldn't look up from their desks. The chair finally broke the silence, his voice flat but formal. "The Congresswoman's statement is entered into the record." The sound of the gavel followed, but it was almost unnecessary. The verdict had already landed. Levin sat there pale and small, while the cameras captured every second of his humiliation. The knockout punch had been thrown, and there was no getting up from it. Even before the gavel echoed, the fallout had started. A screenshot began circulating on Twitter, an internal advertisers group chat, leaked in real time. The messages were blunt, pulling back Q3 spend. "Too risky now," another executive added. "We can't have our brand tied to this circus." Within minutes, the hashtag ad freeze was trending alongside the hearing itself. Levin's empire wasn't just cracking on camera, it was hemorrhaging money behind the scenes. In a newsroom just a few blocks away, a cable producer slid her headset off and shook her head. "Kill his segment tonight," she ordered flatly. The plan had been to book Levin for a primetime interview to capitalize on his testimony. But after watching him stumble through basic constitutional law, the network didn't want the embarrassment rubbing off on them. A red line was drawn across the rundown board, his name erased as if he were already old news. Meanwhile, Levin's own radio show phone lines, usually flooded with loyal fans, were collapsing under a different kind of traffic. Callers weren't cheering him on. They were rattling off timestamps from the hearing and linking them to years of his past mistakes. "Check 11240, one caller said. "He butchered Marbury versus Madison." Another chimed in, "Play back his February 22nd show. He lied about the 14th Amendment too." The phrase participation trophy lawyer caught fire online, turning into a hashtag, a meme, and a rallying cry. For a man who mocked others as second-rate, being branded with that label was fatal. The collapse wasn't waiting for the news cycle. It was happening live in front of the nation, as the legend of Mark Levin unraveled minute by minute. That evening, Levin stormed onto his radio show like he always did, voice booming as if nothing had changed. He called the hearing an ambush, raged about radical Democrats setting traps, and promised his audience that the truth was on his side. But the bravado cracked faster than expected. 15 minutes in, a longtime caller, someone who had introduced himself for years as a fan from Texas, got through. "Mark," he said, his voice steady but disappointed, "I've listened to you for 15 years. Just answer me one thing. What's the doctrine of incorporation? That congresswoman asked you the same question today, and you dodged it. Can you answer it now, right here?" The silence stretched. Levin cut him off with a sharp click and rushed to commercial, but the damage was obvious. Within hours, a new playlist appeared on YouTube, created by a group of young lawyers and law students. The title was blunt: Levin versus Crockett, every error time-stamped. Each clip had annotations, case law citations, and side-by-side corrections. The videos spread like wildfire, recommended by the algorithm, dissected on TikTok, and clipped into memes on Twitter. Instead of his usual viral dominance, Levin was now the butt of legal comedy, a living case study in how not to argue constitutional law. Even his allies in conservative media began shifting tone. On air, one friendly host sighed and said, "Look, sometimes even the best have a bad day." Another tried to laugh it off with, "Nobody's perfect." But the change was obvious. They weren't defending his arguments anymore. They weren't even pretending he had won. They were lowering expectations, softening the blow, and distancing themselves without saying it outright. Levin had tried to spin his humiliation into an attack line, but the spin wheel had broken in front of the whole country. The legal world wasted no time turning the hearing into a teaching moment. Within a week, the ABA Journal released a special feature titled Performance versus Practice. The piece broke down, step by step, how Levin's collapse showed the danger of relying on outdated credentials and media swagger instead of current legal competence. More importantly, the journal went further than analysis. It recommended that lawyers who appear regularly in the media should be required to complete continuing legal education, CLE, focused on constitutional law and courtroom standards. It was a polite way of saying, if you're going to call yourself an expert on TV or radio, you'd better be able to back it up like a real lawyer. Law schools picked up the signal too. Professors in trial advocacy courses began adding a new module to their syllabi, informally dubbed the Crockett Cross. It wasn't just about her questions, but about her preparation, her ability to stack receipts, and her control of the room. Students were assigned to watch the full exchange, then dissect each tactic, how she built credibility, how she exposed contradictions, and how she forced Levin into corners with precision. The takeaway was clear. On-record accuracy was no longer optional. If you claimed expertise, you had to prove it under pressure. Pretty soon, a new phrase entered the professional lexicon: pulling a Crockett. It showed up in classroom banter, bar conferences, and even legal blogs. To pull a Crockett meant preparing so thoroughly that your opponent had nowhere to hide, then pressing them into the narrowest frame where the truth couldn't be dodged. What started as a viral moment in Congress had become a codified example in the practice of law. It wasn't just Crockett's win anymore. It was a standard, one the profession decided to adopt and carry forward. The ripple effects reached far beyond the courtroom or law schools. It hit television and politics head-on. Major news networks quietly rolled out a new internal policy. Legal commentary panels must feature practicing attorneys, not just pundits with old credentials. Producers now required every guest who wanted to claim legal expertise to provide a fact sheet in advance, with citations ready to verify on screen. What once was casual, back-and-forth TV talk now carried the weight of documentation. The days of swagger without sources were over. Politicians felt the shift too. The phrase legal expert became dangerous to self-apply, and members of Congress began avoiding it altogether. Instead, when they spoke on constitutional issues, they leaned on direct citations. As established in Brown versus Board, or Chevron still governs agency authority, the soundbites changed from slogans to case law references. It wasn't because they suddenly loved footnotes, it was because they had seen what happened to Levin. No one wanted to be the next example clipped, fact-checked, and destroyed in real time. The committee itself also set a new precedent. They released a public data pack after the hearing, a detailed timeline of the exchange, complete audio, full transcript, and even footnotes referencing the legal doctrines debated. It was an invitation to the public. Check for yourself. That kind of transparency, rare in the past, now became the model. Anyone, from students to seasoned lawyers, could pull the record and judge it on the facts. In a single hearing, the standard for how legal authority was claimed and verified in American discourse had been re-benchmarked, and the message was unmistakable. Performance alone wouldn't cut it anymore. The celebration and the fallout landed almost at the same time. At the University of Houston Law Center, Crockett's alma mater, the dean announced the creation of the Crockett Chair in Constitutional Practice, an endowed position funded by alumni in the state bar. The chair was meant for professors who blended scholarship with real courtroom experience, a direct tribute to what Crockett had demonstrated in the hearing. Students cheered, donors poured in support, and the law school proudly claimed her as the embodiment of their mission, practice over performance. Meanwhile, Levin's empire was collapsing in plain sight. His TV contract, once considered untouchable, quietly evaporated. A planned op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, a platform that had published him for years, was rejected outright. Editors told reporters privately they could no longer trust his authority on legal matters. His upcoming book tour, which had been promoted with glossy ads and pre-signed copies, was abruptly canceled. Venues pulled out, ticket sales froze, and publishers stopped pushing the title. The man who had defined himself as a legal thought leader now found doors closing at every turn. Then came the most unexpected blow. A federal judge, known as a moderate conservative and usually careful with public comments, posted a short statement online. Expertise must be earned daily. It wasn't long or dramatic, but it was devastating. Everyone knew who it referred to. For years, Levin had been shielded by conservative institutions, but now even within his own ranks, the line had cracked. It was a sign that his credibility wasn't just questioned by opponents, it was slipping with allies too. In the battle between practice and performance, the costs and the crowns had been handed out, and the divide inside the conservative movement was now impossible to ignore. The shockwaves didn't stop at Crockett's victory or Levin's fall. They spread into the institutions that had quietly tolerated performative expertise for years. State bar associations began to move first. They didn't launch disciplinary cases to punish Levin retroactively, but they issued new grievance standards that warned lawyers about misrepresentation in public forums. The message was subtle but sharp. If you go on television or radio and claim expertise, you'd better be current, or you could face professional review. What was once shrugged off as just punditry was now officially under the ethics umbrella. Conservative think tanks, sensing the shift, scrambled behind the scenes. They started compiling internal fact sheets for every topic they put out into the media. Contributors, especially those without active practices, were quietly told they needed to keep their bar status up to date or risk being dropped. The move wasn't about ideology, it was about survival. No one wanted to risk becoming the next Levin, humiliated on a national stage and dragging an entire network or institute down with them. Even the media adapted. In hearings where constitutional issues or legal stakes ran high, producers began adding a live law prof back channel to their broadcasts. A panel of practicing scholars and litigators sat off camera, fact-checking in real time, ready to feed corrections and context into the chyron or the anchor's ear. Viewers no longer just got the soundbite, they got the ruling on whether it held water. The system had learned its lesson. Accountability wasn't optional anymore. The battlefield had expanded, and the rules of engagement had changed. In the days that followed, Crockett was asked to sit for a prime-time interview. She didn't gloat or replay the takedown. Instead, she kept her answer steady. "This was never about embarrassing Mr. Levin," she said. "It was about setting a standard. If you call yourself an expert, you should be able to prove it under pressure." That's all. Her words landed even harder than the confrontation itself because they reframed the entire moment, not as a personal fight, but as a line in the sand for American discourse. It didn't take long for the standard to be tested again. On another network, a fresh face appeared, branding himself as a constitutional authority. He spoke loudly, with the same kind of sweeping claims Levin once made. But before the segment had even finished airing, Twitter lit up with what viewers were calling the Crockett checklist. Users posted side-by-side comparisons, citing cases, doctrines, and timestamps. Every claim was scrutinized in real time. The community wasn't waiting for a congresswoman to do it again. They had learned to do it themselves. The audience had adopted her method, and the culture of blind deference to experts had started to crumble. One evening, as a recap show closed out its coverage, the anchor leaned back and summed it up in a single line. From today forward, volume won't replace competence. It was more than commentary. It was the epilogue to a moment that had reshaped how America judged authority. The message was simple, and the nation had heard it loud and clear. The era of unchecked performance was over, and the age of proof had begun. If you believe moments like this matter, when the truth cuts through the noise, make sure you hit like on this video so more people can see it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next showdown that the mainstream won't cover. And I want to hear from you. Did Jasmine Crockett just set a new standard for legal expertise? Or was this simply Levin's worst day? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice makes this community stronger.